Last week we studied Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. And it was an action-filled discussion and story. But I want to review some of the points from that story. First of all, Martha and Mary believed in and loved Jesus. They had no doubt at all that Jesus could heal Lazarus of his illness. But Jesus also loved them, but he wanted to stretch their faith. And so I love it. It says that Jesus loved them, therefore he waited 2 extra days to come. And he did it for their benefit, even though he knew it was going to cause them emotional pain. In the end, they were going to be so much better off. Their faith in him was going to be very strong. And Jesus also wanted to wait so that he could display his power and show the Jewish leaders once and for all that he was God. This was all planned by God from the very beginning. Lazarus getting sick and dying was something that God allowed. It was part of his plan. It was all part of his plan. Jesus was completely in control. So when Jesus met with Mary outside the tomb, first he met with Martha. And remember, Martha just believed strongly. And Jesus had to tell her, don't you know, I'm the resurrection and the life. He that believes in me will never die. He's But Mary was outside Jesus met Mary outside the tomb, and uh, and he wept with her, but he wept with her not because of Lazarus. He was weeping her for because of the hurt that she was feeling. He felt bad for her. He loved her, and their pain, he felt their pain and carried their pain for them, just like he carried our pain and our sin on the cross for us. That's who Jesus was and is. That's who he is. He hasn't changed since then, not a bit. And but then finally, Jesus displayed awesome power when he called Lazarus, and Lazarus' body was healed and brought him back to life. So today, what we're going to talk about is the aftermath of this tremendous miracle, and it goes pretty deep. It goes pretty deep. We're also going to begin looking at the road to the cross for Jesus. Let's start in John chapter 11, verses 45 and 46. Gary, could you read that, please?
Yes. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done.
So John's first emphasis is that many who were there to see the resurrection believed in Jesus. I'm not surprised that he said that, because John's stated purpose for writing his whole book was that we would believe in Jesus. John 10:31 says, but these are written, or 20:31, I'm sorry. John 20:31 says, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So it makes sense that John's first emphasis were the people that believed in Jesus. What's amazing to me is that not all of them really came to belief. It seems to me that the ones that went to tell the Pharisees
like tattletales
were like tattletales. They were shocked at what happened, but they didn't connect what Jesus did with who he was.
What would it take? I mean, you raise someone that has been dead for 4 days? Yuck.
Yeah.
Not even coming back from the dead.
Just as Abraham told The rich man, yes.
Okay, so let's go on to Nancy, could you read verses 47 to 53?
So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, "What are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish." He did not say this of his own accord, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. So from that day on, they made plans to put him to death.
This is really interesting. The raising of Lazarus was the ultimate display of Jesus' power.
No doubt.
He did it so that the Jews would put their trust in him. Yet, this event was the sentinel event that caused the Jewish leaders to become serious about catching and killing Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
It shows the extent of their unbelief and their spiritual blindness.
Gravity.
It also shows the extent of their wickedness. Man. But Jesus had this all planned out. He was on his time schedule. He was on his time schedule. It was nearing the time for purification for Passover, and the Jewish leaders were plotting to murder an innocent man. They recognized the powerful things Jesus did and still refused to believe in him.
Amazing.
Isn't that amazing? They missed the whole meaning of Passover. They were going to do Passover as a rote thing that they just do every year. They were thinking about worshiping God, and what did that angel do? He passed over, and that the lamb represents something, represents Jesus. So what was their motivation for what they were doing other than pure hate?
They want to keep their job.
It was political.
Selfishness.
Keep the
Their own
Romans
power.
happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was all political.
What I think is interesting is in verse 48, it says, if we let him go on like this, like they had like that they had a choice in that.
Yeah.
They thought it did.
They were deluded.
That just struck me when Nancy read it. I'm like, wow, it's pretty arrogant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were afraid that Jesus would cause the Romans to come in and destroy Israel. They did not want to lose their power. And I'm going to tell you something that is true, and you may not like it. Politicians have not changed in 2,000 years.
Nope.
I don't care what side of the aisle you are in the United States. Politicians do not want to lose their power, and they will do anything to maintain their position. And the Jewish leaders were no different. They were thinking only of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you said, Barbara, you hit it the nail on the head. It's very selfish. And
It
they
even goes beyond 2,000 years. I mean, you go all the way back to Pharaoh and before, let my people go,
that's
I
right.
don't think so.
That's right. So let's talk about Caiaphas. Caiaphas was the high priest at the time. What do we know about Caiaphas?
I preached.
Caiaphas was a high priest from AD 18 to AD 37. He was son-in-law of Annas, who was a previous high priest. Both Caiaphas and Annas were Sadducees. The Sadducees were the liberals of the day. They did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. They didn't believe in angels or anything really spiritual. Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead would have been a shock to the Sadducees.
Blasted a hole in that theology, didn't it?
He just blew them out of the water. Jesus was constantly challenging their beliefs because they were so wrong. So Caiaphas was part of a delegation to Rome in AD 17. Then in AD 18, he was appointed high priest by Valerius Gratus, the governor before Pilate. So when Pilate arrived some years later, I don't know exactly when, he retained Caiaphas in the job as the high priest. The job as high priest was a political job at that time. There's no evidence that says that Caiaphas was even a Levite. He probably was, but it doesn't ever talk about it. It doesn't talk about him being in the high priestly line at all. He had very strong connections to the Romans, and it gave him much power and money, and that's what every politician wants. As high priest, Caiaphas was really the most powerful of all the Jews because he was the leader of the Sanhedrin, and the Romans understood this. The Romans understood that the Jewish nation was controlled by the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, which was controlled by the high priest in Jerusalem, and that's why they said, we're going to appoint who that high priest is going to be.
Mhm.
It sounded from reading that it changes every year. It says for that year, Caiaphas was the high priest.
Yeah, sometimes it went back and forth between a couple of guys, but we know from historical records that Caiaphas was the high priest from AD 18 to AD 37. And and even though Caiaphas was a wicked man, he was still the high priest. John pointed out that in saying that it would be good for one man to die so the nation would be saved, Caiaphas was used by God to prophesy Jesus' death for Israel and for all those in the world that would believe in him.
Mhm.
And this is who God is. God often, throughout the history of mankind, has used things that are bad to do his good stuff.
I think of Saul, Old Testament Saul. Is Saul among the prophets? God used him.
Yeah. There's many, many instances where God used something that was bad and turned it for good. Caiaphas thought he was in charge, but Jesus was in charge. That is why they had not been able to kill Jesus when they wanted to. They'd already tried on several occasions. Jesus died when he decided the time was right.
Mhm.
Remember what it says in John 10, verse 18? Jesus said he had the authority to lay down his life and the authority to take it up again. He was and is God. Caiaphas couldn't have even touched Jesus without Jesus giving the permission for him to do so. This is very important for us to understand and for everyone to understand. Jesus died willingly for us because of his great, great love for us.
I remember when I teach the kids in Awana, because I teach the whole Bible so they could get an idea of the timeline. It took me 7 years, but I did it 2 or 3 times. But anyway, I would tell them they didn't sneak up on Jesus and grab him unawares and kill him. It all went according to his plan. It was Jesus's plan, not anybody else's. They didn't surprise Jesus and kill him, and he didn't know what was going to happen. It was his plan, and the kids often didn't understand that. That to be willingly lay down your life, and like, because we can see all the things that they were doing. Oh, they're plotting here and plotting there, but it was all according to plan.
Yeah, well, we've already studied as we studied through John. They picked up stones to stone him, and Jesus disappeared.
He just walked out.
It wasn't his time,
Yeah.
and he was on his time schedule. Um, And then it says in verse 53 that from the time they heard about Lazarus, they made serious plans to murder Jesus. Lazarus, resurrecting Lazarus was the sentinel event that that started turning the tide for them to make the plans to crucify Jesus, to kill him. Okay, let's go on to verses 55 to 57. Barbara, could you read those, please?
Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. They were looking for Jesus and saying to one another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think? That he will not come for the feast at all?" Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, he should let them know so that they might arrest him.
Yeah, see, they had it's like the mob having a contract out on somebody.
Yeah.
But did they arrest Jesus then? No. Jesus was on his own timeline. They thought they were in control. They had no idea. And like I said last week, they should have been terrified of Jesus because he is God. They were blaspheming the God of the universe, the God who created the universe. How terrifying. So Jesus left Judea to let things cool down a bit because it wasn't time for him to die. While he was away, many people were pouring into Jerusalem because the Passover was near, and people would come from all over to go to Passover. They came to Jerusalem, and the stories about Jesus were going around like wildfire. If you heard that Jesus raised a man from the dead who'd been dead for 4 days, don't you know that's a story that would get passed around in the rumor mill very, very quickly? And everyone was looking for him. They wanted to see him do something. But the Jewish leaders put out the word that if anyone saw him, they were to let them know so they could arrest him. They wanted to arrest him privately. They didn't want to arrest him in public because too many people believed in him. They were afraid of a riot.
And they wouldn't look good.
Yeah, no, yeah. It had to look good for them. But Jesus, again, was on his own timeline, and the time was near, but it wasn't at hand. His death had to happen on Passover because Jesus was to be the Passover lamb for all of us. The, um, the Jewish leaders had no control at all. Jesus was in control. So let's move on to chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. I think it's your turn, Bob.
Okay. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany, where Lazarus was. Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at the table.
Mm-hmm.
Mary, therefore, took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself whatever was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you will always have with you, but you do not always have me."
So Jesus started looking toward the cross. The time was near. Um, um, it was 6 days to Passover. That's what it says here. And according to Kostenberger, the Jews considered that Passover began on Thursday evening.
6 o'clock. Or
Six,
sundown.
yeah, sundown was Thursday evening. So this was probably the Friday evening before Passover. That would make it a Sabbath day because Sabbath always began at sunset of the day before.
Mhm.
So the Sabbath is on Saturday, but it begins at sunset on Friday. Jesus went to Bethany to visit Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and they gave a large dinner for Jesus. Yeah, they were excited. And Jesus was reclining at the table next to Lazarus. Don't you know, I would have loved to have had conversations with Lazarus. Hey, man, what was it like? What was it like? Um, and while he was there, Mary came in and poured a whole jar of pure nard on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. So, nard was a very exotic perfume. It came from a plant that grows in the Himalayas in northern India. And the perfume is an essential oil that is extracted from the roots of the plant. And the oil was a very thick and strong smelling stuff. And nard was also very expensive. Judas said that it could have been sold for, that much nard could have been sold for 300 denarii, which would be approximately a year's wages for a common laborer, because typically a denarii was a day's wage. Today, if you talk about just a year's wages for a common laborer today, it would be valued between $40,000 and $50,000, assuming that's the amount that somebody makes as a common laborer. Truly, it was a lavish gift. Nard was when Mary poured it on Jesus' feet, it would have filled the air in the house with a sweet fragrance.
It would have been overpowering.
It would have been really strong, probably. This was fitting when you think about who Jesus was, the effect he had on a place when he was there. Jesus brought sweetness to every place he went. He brought peace and mercy and grace and love. What a privilege they had to be with Jesus in person.
Yeah.
What a privilege they had. And wiping Jesus' feet with her hair was quite a statement. It was considered very improper for a Jewish woman to let down her hair in public. This was not a sexual act, as some think.
Mm-mm.
Mary was willing to suffer humiliation of letting down her hair to show Jesus just how much he loved her. She loved him, and she was showing him the greatest kindness she could. She was trying to show him, man, he'd done so much for them and raising Lazarus and all this stuff. They'd done so much to him, for them. And she just was, this was the most lavish thing she could do for him. And she knew that he deserved it. And this was a servant's job. Washing feet was a servant's job, but Mary took on the place of a servant. But instead of using water, she used this very expensive perfume.
So it's like an offering, a sacrifice.
Yeah, as a sacrifice, yeah. But Judas objected. I love this though, but John exposed Judas for what he really was.
Mm-hmm.
He was a thief. He didn't really want to sell a perfume to give the money to the poor. He wanted to sell it so he could get a hold of some of the money. Mm-hmm. He saw the nard as a very valuable item and couldn't stand to see it poured out without cashing it in. Judas was greedy. Mm-hmm. That shows his true nature. I think he was one of these kind of guys that could put on a front. And all the other disciples were surprised at what he did when he betrayed Jesus. Jesus wasn't surprised. Jesus knew who Judas was from the very beginning.
Sure.
Jesus knew what Judas was going to do from the very beginning. But Jesus told them to leave Mary alone. Probably unknown to Mary, the Holy Spirit used her to look forward to Jesus' sacrifice for us.
And you stop and think about all that time that Judas was with Jesus, Jesus picked him, and all that time Jesus knew what he was going to do and knew his sinful heart.
Yes.
Yet, but it was part of the plan.
It was, that's right. It was,
He loved him anyway.
it was part of the plan.
Knowing
And
that he
Jesus
would be
loved
saved.
him anyway.
Yep.
When we get to the spot where he washes the disciples' feet, he washed Judas' feet too. He showed Judas grace.
And he didn't take it.
He didn't take it. No. Okay, let's go on to chapter 12, verses 9 through 11. Kathy.
12, 9 through 11. When the large crowd of the Jews learned that Jesus was there, they came not only on account of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to put Lazarus to death as well, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus.
Isn't that amazing?
Hmm.
When the people heard that Jesus was in Bethany, a large crowd formed. They'd heard about Lazarus. They wanted to see both Jesus and Lazarus.
Would have been amazing.
Would have been amazing. What an amazing miracle. Consequently, the Jewish leaders decided they were going to have to kill Lazarus as well as Jesus because he was drawing people to Jesus. When people found Jesus and Lazarus together, and Lazarus could affirm the fact that he had been resurrected by Jesus, many people were turning to Jesus.
Well, there was a large crowd watched that happen.
Yeah. So here's a question I'm going to ask you. Do you think Lazarus was afraid of dying after this?
Not anymore.
No.
Anymore.
Absolutely not. He knew better than anyone besides Jesus that the death of the body meant life at peace with God. He would have been in Sheol with Abraham and people like Abraham and Elijah and Daniel and Moses, all these David and Rahab and Ruth and Boaz and all these people that had gone before him and believed in God. They're waiting for Jesus to pay the price so that they could go to heaven.
Yep.
And Lazarus had been with them for 4 days. Now, how much Jesus allowed him to remember of that, I don't know.
I know.
But it was enough. It would have been enough. Okay, I've got more here, but I think I'm going to stop there because the next part is the triumphal entry, and I think that goes with.
Nice.
I think that's next week's.
Okay.
I can just hear Lazarus now up in paradise saying, "No, don't send me back to earth.
Yeah.
I like it up here."
Yeah. He had to physically die again.
He did. Yeah, yeah. He did.
But I believe that Lazarus and Mary and Martha were part of the 120 people that were in that upper room when the Holy Spirit came.
Sure.
At the time of Pentecost. Because they believed so strongly in Jesus.
They were there firsthand.
And Lazarus was probably part of the early church and a very strong member of the church. So, yeah. So, other comments or questions before I stop the recording?
All right.